New Orleans is the best place for a haunted tour. New Orleans was founded by prostitutes and prisoners, by nuns and pirates. It has several hundred years of really fascinating and sometimes gruesome history. So let's explore, if you went on a haunted tour of the French Quarter, what places would you visit and what stories would you hear? The first and most famous house in the French Quarter for having ghosts and being haunted is Lalaurie Mansion. The American Horror Story featured it, but I have to tell you, they actually filmed most of the film at a different house, the Herman Grima house, which is also very interesting. Nicolas Cage owned this house at one point, and recently it sold for $4.3 million to the founder of U.S. Ghost Adventures. So a lot of people are putting a lot of stock in the stories that happened in this house. So let me tell you what you would hear if you went on a ghost story. You would hear that Madame Delphine Lalaurie was living here. She was on her third husband, the previous husbands having died in kind of suspicious circumstances. The third one had already left her. She was having a party at the house. Something caught on fire. She had chained her enslaved chef, the person that was cooking for all of them, but was an enslaved person. She had chained them to the kitchen, and there was a fire. She fled the fire, and when the volunteer firefighters went into the house to try to rescue everybody and put out the fire, they discovered a torture chamber, and they discovered the bodies of 7 enslaved people who had been tortured and chained and left to die in the house. The story has it that she jumped in her carriage and fled the city because she was going to be prosecuted for treating her enslaved people so poorly and for leaving them to die in the fire. Now, what really happened? We'll probably never know. Delphine Lalaurie was on her third marriage. Her husband had left her. She did live in that house. She did have enslaved people. After the fire, the newspaper at the time reported that the volunteer firefighters did find 7 people who had been mutilated and who were chained up in the house. Whether or not she had chained the chef to the kitchen and they were more willing to die than to go up to the chamber and be tortured, whether or not her maid had fled over the roof and the neighbors had reported her, that we'll probably never know. But we do know that there was a fire when she owned the house. There were human remains found in the house that had been chained in the house, and she did flee to France where she lived out the rest of her life. So definitely a gruesome history to this house. I do have to point out, if you're interested in buying it the next time it's for sale, the house that's actually standing there is not the house that Delphine Lalaurie lived in because it burnt down. But if there are ghosts, they probably stick close to home, so the house could still be haunted. Another place you will probably see on your French Quarter haunted tour is Jackson Square. And you say, how could Jackson Square, a square, be haunted? This is where the Europeans decided to put the center of their settlement, and it has been occupied since 1718. But for the first 130 years or so, this square was not the beautiful square you see right now. This square was where the military paraded. This square is where they put people in stocks. This square is where they executed people. The square is where they whipped enslaved people. So this square has a very sordid history, and people have reported seeing some of those tortured souls walking around the square. So you will probably see this site. As you enjoy its beauty, remember that it used to be the place of public executions. No haunted tour of the French Quarter would be complete without talking about Muriel Laveau. Muriel Laveau was the voodoo queen of New Orleans. She was a person of color, a free woman of color. She was a respected hairdresser, healer, and voodoo practitioner. She lived from 1801 to 1881. She was a very well-respected member of society. Many of the wealthier families visited her beauty parlor. Many of them consulted with her, had voodoo consultations. You could be both Catholic and voodoo at the time. And she would use the gossip that she heard at the beauty parlor to give information out in her voodoo consultations. We don't know. We don't know if she really had visions and really knew the future, or if she was great at gossip. But she was a very famous person, very well respected, and people still like to visit her tomb. The legend says that if you mark her tomb with 3 X's and leave offerings, she will grant you a favor. And then if the wish you asked for is granted, you are supposed to go back and leave an offering and circle your X's. And you can no longer go to her tomb without a guide, because leaving X's in a historical landmark is frowned on. Another place that you might see on your French Quarter haunted tour is the Sultan's Palace. It's actually historically known as the Gardette-LaPrete House, which I may be mispronouncing, at 716 Dauphine Street. The legend has it that there was a wealthy sultan who had actually stolen a harem, so like a bunch of women, and a fortune from his brother, and somehow ended up in the French Quarter fleeing from his brother, and he rented this house. And while he was there, everyone was murdered. The entire harem, and he was buried alive in the courtyard, and no killer was ever found. I hate to tell you, but there's no historical record of a sultan or a mass murder in this house, or even being in the French Quarter. We do know that it was owned by Jean-Baptiste Laprete, and it was later rented out. So who knows who it was rented to? It could have been a sultan, or a sultan disguised as somebody else. Another spot that will definitely be on your French Quarter haunted tour is Muriel's. Muriel's is actually a famous restaurant in New Orleans, and according to Muriel's, haunted by Pierre-Antoine Lepardie Jourdan. He was a gambler, and according to the legend, he lost the home in a poker game in the 1800s. He actually put up his house during the game, and then when he lost the house, he committed suicide. And he said to haunt the Seance Lounge. You can actually go up there and visit it. You could get a drink at the bar and go up to the lounge and have a drink. And in addition, the restaurant sets a table for him every night. The building dates back to the 1700s, and before it was a restaurant, it was at one time a private home. Pierre Jourdan did live there, and he did die under mysterious circumstances. You'll have to go visit yourself to see if his ghost is there. Another spot on most French Quarter haunted tours is the Hotel Monteleone. If you don't go on your haunted tour, you should just go visit to see the Carousel Bar, but that's another story. This is one of the most haunted hotels in the country by people who like to stay at haunted hotels. The hotel actually opened in 1886, and shortly afterwards, late 1800s, 1890s, depending on which story you read, a toddler named Maurice Baguerre died in the hotel. And it's said that he still visits his parents' room, and that his mom used to go back every year on the anniversary of his death to visit with him. We do know that the hotel was opened in 1886 by Joseph Monteleone, and it has hosted a whole slew of famous people like Tennessee Williams and Ernest Hemingway. And we do know that the staff passes down ghost stories from staff person to staff person and to its guests. So next time you're staying there, you'll have to ask the staff about the haunted stories. Another very famous place in New Orleans that you will definitely see on your haunted tour is Pirates Alley. This is actually the alley that's between the St. Louis Cathedral and the Cabildo, which used to be like the police station or the town hall. So we're not quite sure why it was called Pirates Alley. In addition, duels would actually happen behind the cathedral. So there were a lot of duels and a lot of people that were hurt or killed behind the cathedral. While we don't know for sure if pirates lived here or walked down here, we do know that people had duels behind the cathedral, and we do know that William Faulkner lived on this alley. You can actually go to the Faulkner bookstore, go in there, and if you go upstairs, there's a little room with a typewriter where he wrote his first novel, and if you're very quiet, you might hear him typing on the typewriter. So there may be some ghosts from the people in the duels. Maybe there's William Faulkner's ghost. You'll just have to go and check it out. Another famous place on ghost tours in New Orleans is the Old Absinthe House. Built in 1806 as a grocery store, it later became a bar in 1815, and that's when its storied history really began. It survived Prohibition by selling absinthe in secret rooms. There's also a lot of story here about how the prior John Lafayette actually met with Andrew Jackson to be recruited to help out in the battle in New Orleans. We don't know whether that happened, but there's a lot of interesting stories associated with the Old Absinthe House. Definitely worth visiting on your own or seeing as part of a haunted tour of the French Quarter. If you're in New Orleans and you want to stay at a haunted hotel, I told you about the Hotel Monteleone, which is haunted. Another haunted hotel is the Andrew Jackson Hotel. The Andrew Jackson Hotel was at one point in time an orphanage. orphanage burnt down, and now it's said that the spirits of those boys live in the building. And guests who stay here hear childish laughter, they see flickering lights, they see shadowy figures, and if you leave your phone or your camera out, when you wake up in the morning, you might find pictures of yourself sleeping while you were staying at the hotel. The site was indeed an orphanage and a boarding school in the 1800s. It burnt down in 1794. It's unclear whether boys were actually in the building when it burnt down or not. The current building was reconstructed in the 1890s as a hotel. I do know someone who stayed in the hotel and said they found pictures of themselves sleeping on it. So if you're looking for a haunted hotel, you might try the Andrew Jackson Hotel. One of the most famous sites in New Orleans for both vampire stories and just general history is the Old Ursuline Convent. It was built in the early 1700s. It is the oldest building in the lower Mississippi Valley. It is definitely one of only 2 remaining French architecture buildings in New Orleans. This is where vampire legends started. The nuns that ran the Old Ursuline Convent were looking for girls to educate and to grow up and to marry these former prisoners who had settled in New Orleans. And they rode off to France and said they didn't have any girls to educate. And the King of France couldn't go to the prisons for girls, couldn't go to the streets for girls like he found the prostitutes. He went to the orphanages, and he sent over these orphans, and they were very poor, so they put all of their clothing into wooden boxes, which in French are called cassettes. And so these cassettes, and so these girls came across the ocean on ships, and because they were girls and women, they probably weren't allowed to be up on deck a lot with the sailors, so they probably had to stay below, probably got seasick, did not see the sun, did not eat very well. They got off the ship in New Orleans with their cassettes that looked like caskets, and they paraded through the streets going to the convent, and they were very white, and because they hadn't seen the sun and they were sick. And when they got to the convent, they went in, and the Ursuline order is a sequestered order, so these girls went in and then did not come back out, and so they would only be seen from the attic windows on the 3rd floor. And so there arose the vampire legends. These girls brought their beds, their cassettes with them. They went into the building and they never came out during daylight. Whether you believe in vampires or not, it is definitely worth going to check out the Ursuline Convent. So there are 10 places that you will find on a haunted tour of the French Quarter.